Okay, hello everybody, and welcome. This is the Kounteq Podcast. Where we provide practical tips for manufacturers and multi-channel sellers to buy better, manufacture smartly, and grow with confidence. Today we have our first guest, COO Manzer, and just a short introduction. He has 20 years of experience in integration and automation and running his own business. He was the CEO of one of the biggest food distribution companies in the UK. He actually started from his garage and successfully made up to 40 million annual revenue, and has helped more than 100 of manufacturing product-based businesses to optimize the way they work. So, Manzer, welcome, and tell me, how are you doing today?
Very well, Marco. I'm really great. How about yourself? How are you?
I'm doing fine, the first thing I want to ask you about is actually supply chain issues. What do you consider is the biggest threat to the supply chain at the moment?
Okay, it's a good question, interesting question, and so it's also counterintuitive. So what's been happening is that, as you know, due to COVID, all product suppliers were importing more product to effectively because supply chains were disrupted due to close down in China and other countries. So a lot of manufacturers, many product-based businesses who we deal with, imported a lot of product, stocked up on the basis that supply chains will be disrupted. Well, we go now post-COVID. And what's happened is that we've got what they call an inventory crisis. If you look at Google, you'll see what that's all about. Inventory crisis is where businesses now have too much stock, and because their demand is also, there's a demand destruction going on where demand is dropping, particularly in the Western European economies due to a cost of living crisis, interest rates rising. So you've got demand that's flat or coming down, and you've got these companies with a lot of stock. So I would call that is called the inventory crisis at the moment. That's the biggest issue now we're facing. 2 years ago, very different.
Okay, and can you tell us why exactly is this happening? So what would you say, apart from COVID-19, that has the most influence on the supply chain?
Okay, so where we are, let's go forward from where we just stopped. So inventory crisis means we've got businesses with too much stock. COVID was the main driver for this, but now we've got other drivers involved. You've got the political situation. So if there's a war in Europe, which means there's disruption of supplies, agricultural supplies. We just look at general supply chain. Agricultural supplies have been disrupted. This products, for example, steel has been disrupted. So you would have had businesses stock up a lot. So that's political. The other we mentioned also is simply the issue of demand for certain components. For example, chips that go into vehicles. You've got Jaguar recently reducing the production of certain models from 5 to 4 days because there's insufficient supply of those chips. So there's a lack of supply there of that product for that finished product. So there's a political situation, there's supply issues in terms of demand for that product, but the overall position here for most SMEs is the market that we're in, they've got too much stock at present. And now they have to see, and we have to then discuss how these businesses handle, because remember, too much stock means cash stuck in stock. They pay for the stock. If they're not getting the sales in, that is now a problem for most businesses.
Yes, so as it is disrupting the UK market, what would you say? So who is most affected by this?
Okay, so in terms of the effect, and the market that I'm in and the sort of customers we are dealing with are manufacturers. So they will be deep manufacturers who buy components, make intermediate components and have a finished product, or they're e-commerce businesses who will buy a finished product, typically maybe bundle it and then sell it on or through several sales channels. So the effect is across particularly the SME business, this very small one to medium-sized SMEs, all either manufacturers or e-commerce businesses. So that's the main market that's been affected by this situation. So we need to now really discuss how do they cope with this. The next question is, what do they do to mitigate the fact that they're sitting with too much stock? Too much stock, not enough demand. And the way that they need to address this is through three factors. They need to look at they need to sell more. That's number one. They really need to focus on sales and marketing to reduce the stock holding. There's no other way to do that. Number two, they need to go back to the suppliers and renegotiate the terms the way they are supplied. In other words, instead of buying bulk, they buy in bits, regular deliveries, smaller quantities to come in, so they can manage that pipeline of supply without being overstocked. And number three, they really have to look at if they're manufactured intermediate product, semi-finished products. So you have a manufacturer buying raw materials, they make intermediate components, and then they have the finished product. Don't make the finished product, just stop at the intermediate component, so that you have got only stock. Really, majority of your money is invested in intermediate components, less raw materials, no finished product. So three things we covered there. One is look at your supplier relationships in terms of breaking up the supply coming in, sell more of the product that's sitting in stock, and finally stock up for intermediate products, semi-finished, reduce your stock of raw, and don't reduce the stock of finished product.
Okay, so say, for example, you have a small or a medium business and you're growing. So would you recommend these changes for those kind of companies, or should they just focus the ones who have bigger and more established companies?
I think we're looking at the smaller companies. So we're looking at company sizes between, say, 5 to 25, 30 employee businesses, typically turning over anything from $500,000 to in the region of 20, 25 million. That's the sort of level. Remember that the large enterprises have got international operations. So if the currency is a factor, they have multi-currency trading. So their risk is spread across. These are smaller national businesses. Maybe they have a site in Europe due to Brexit, but they're smaller business. The focus here is on those small enterprises who are effectively relying on sales to generate cash. If those sales dry up and you've got your money stuck in stock, that's where the problem is. And remember, interest rates are rising, so the cost of borrowing is rising, and banks have less appetite to lend. So the market we're looking at is the smaller to medium-sized business. The large corporates, they have plenty of cash, plus their risk is mitigated by multinational and transnational trading. So that's the sector we're looking at here.
Okay, so can you maybe provide us with some real-life examples? Have you encountered something similar in your past?
Yeah, absolutely. So we've been working with businesses pre-COVID, during COVID, and post-COVID. So we've got a pretty good picture of how businesses have changed their perception of managing the supply chain. So if one of the sectors we work in quite a bit is the electronic sector, and as we've just discussed, electronic supplies during COVID were very difficult, very disrupted. So we had clients who were holding component stock between 6 to 12 months, literally. So you can imagine in that case, they were stuck in cash. A lot of money was stuck in the stock, cash, plus they had a lot of stock sitting physically, which they had to manage, right? So that's, if they were not able to do that, the effect of that was in that particular sector, which is electronics, they will go to the secondary gray market. Not imported, buy from other companies locally at a much higher price. So they're buying maybe smaller quantities, but they're spending a lot more money, which reduces the margin on the finished product. So that's the electronic sector. Looking at something like food is for the UK, remember UK imports 50% of their product. So they are exposed to supply chain from Europe, that's Brexit. So where pre-Brexit you could get goods in say 4 to 5 days, now it takes up to 2 weeks. So you've got product that's sitting on port or on the vehicle for much longer. Secondly, you've got the currency issue where the pound has devalued, though it's recovered recently, that you're exposed to that. So food has its own drivers there in terms of, and food is perishable also. That means it's got less shelf life in transportation. Different type of dynamic there. If you look at another industry that we work a lot with, furniture. Furniture is an interesting one. They don't use much raw material. Really, their raw material is wood, which is mostly locally purchased. Their issues are different. They are more, the business models of companies we deal with are custom, bespoke designers and producers. So their dynamic is essentially very process-driven, task-driven, and they are very reliant on commercial business or even consumer business. So if consumer demand is falling, their business is affected. If commercial projects are less, their demand is affected, hence their sales are affected.
Yeah, so yeah, we all know that UK is famous for its furniture industry. Now, I want to dive more deep into this matter. So, let's say you are a small SME and you're rising. Why can't you use spreadsheets or legacy that has been working for you so far?
Yeah. Look, I mean, I love spreadsheets. We use spreadsheets even now. But remember, we are talking about not a single process here. Most businesses are a combination of processes, okay? Which means that those processes are not standalone, they're linked. So there's 1, 2, 3, 4 steps typically in a smaller manufacturer. A bigger manufacturer are more complex. So your data is moving from one process to another process. With spreadsheets, typically then to cope with something like that, you may have 2, 3 spreadsheets, which means spreadsheets have to pass data. Now, spreadsheet means somebody has to design the spreadsheet. There have to be formulas. So whoever's done the design, it's very specific to the way they've worked on it. So it's more, if the person's not there, it doesn't turn up to work, it's very difficult to pass that knowledge on to somebody else. So it's very person specific. Secondly, errors. If an error is introduced in a complex set of spreadsheets, it's difficult to find. It's time consuming. So that's another issue. Thirdly, it's not scalable. So if your business grows, you can't have 10, 12 spreadsheets running a business. It just becomes too cumbersome, too error prone to scale. So no chance of scaling there. So that's the issue with spreadsheets. Spreadsheets, I think rule of thumb is if you have more than 5 spreadsheets in a business, can't be scaled. Need a different way of working. Coming to legacy systems traditionally replace spreadsheets, but legacy systems disadvantage that they're on-prem. In other words, they're on premises. You need to have servers which are expensive, and you need to have a local area network within your premises or your company to be able to connect the data, to connect the PCs with the server. That's expensive, so you need to do that. Secondly, legacy systems aren't really scalable. If you have a business of certain size and you want to add functionality, either you have to go back to the software provider, which will cost you more, or you have to add on through API or EDI development, which is very expensive. So the scalability isn't there. And finally, if you wish to add on additional modules, that connectivity, or you wish to download data through simply CSV file, many legacy systems don't let you do that even. So it's those 3 factors really affect the legacy. So coming back to the question of spreadsheets and legacy, if a business wishes to scale, wishes to have better onboarding and better buy-in from their staff, and have minimum amount of on-site infrastructure cost, they need to move on to the cloud.
So since we're talking about an ERP implementation, I'm sure that CEOs of SMEs would love to know about this. So if someone was to make these changes, what are some risks they need to consider?
With the ERP implementation, is that what you mean?
Yeah.
Look, the ERP implementation is it starts early, Mirko. It really does. It starts from a mindset. And this mindset means planning. Planning is key to it. Before we even talk about project management, planning. Planning means you need to have an idea of what is my knowledge, what are my resources, right? That means time, money, and most important, do I really know my business? In other words, have I got workflows? Have I got a concept of what is the flow of sales fulfillment, production fulfillment? Need to document that. So you need to plan what your requirements are. Because once you have workflow, you can then work out those are my pain points, those are my requirements, those are my goals. Document that. So planning your requirements, your pain points, key. That's number 1. Number 2 is that you will need to select software. And there's many criteria. The selection criteria, we can write a book about this. But the selection criteria, apart from based on what is financially palatable for yourself, it has to be a product or a solution. Let me talk solution, not software. We are talking solution. It needs to be scalable. In other words, as your business grows, you should be able to expand it. It needs to be also accessible from anywhere. Obviously, now we are working from home. It has to have a great buy-in from your staff. So the UI has to be good. It has to be user-friendly. So those are some of the factors that you would consider on what the solution would look like. Then we move on to the actual implementation of ERP, which is project management. And I think that's not really appreciated, because what happens sometimes is that you would go on the internet, say, okay, I need inventory management, and you get Google will list you all this great inventory management software. So you'll go onto the website and say, yeah, here are the videos, you can do this in 5 days, 10 days, load up your data, configure the settings, and you're ready to go with a few videos. It doesn't work that way. It doesn't work that way. Data itself is a major area, but ultimately with your workflows, you have to test, you have to configure the ERP system to how your business works. And remember, these ERP systems on the cloud they are fit for all. In other words, they are there for many markets, many sectors, many industries. So what works for you for the same software may not work for another company based on the integrations, based how you structure the data, just based how you use the software, because there's so many permutations. So that settings, those parameters, when you come to do the ERP implementation, is key. And that comes down to project planning, and ultimately it comes to knowledge. So you've looked at the software, you like the way it looks, but you really don't know how it works. So where do we go from here? You need expert advice, you need knowledge, and that knowledge comes from ideally professionals, partners who've already implemented those systems. So they have knowledge of the software, they have knowledge of managing an IT project, and thirdly, they have some business acumen knowledge, because ultimately it's a commercial endeavor you're involved in. It's workflows. Your business is your business. Software is a tool to make your business efficient. So whoever you take on, and we are now talking about a professional partner who will help you with the implementation, they should have a project management IT experience, they should have knowledge of the software itself, and they should have ideally some idea of what your industry is or what commercial requirements you have.
Okay, excellent. So I really appreciate that detailed answer. Now I have one more question. So in your opinion, since you are more than 20 years in this kind of industry, so which system would you say stands out the most?
Mirko, I mean, that really, it's not a one-line answer. And I go back to the answer I just gave. Each company, each sector, each area, each region of the world will have its own requirements. The solution, remember we're talking about solution here. What software you go with is steps further down. The first is solution. What are you trying to achieve? What are your workflows, and how does it all look as a solution? Once you've got that solution, then you select your apps. And depending on your industry, that's your size, your requirements, there may be different apps. So for example, if you are a sophisticated manufacturing, you build equipment, machinery, that sort of where your bill of materials are quite deep, you have a lot of sub-assemblies, your finished product is complex, you would want a software that will deal with, can cope with a deep bill of materials, can have a bill of materials can have a couple of hundred components or maybe thousands of components. Your operations may be quite wide in terms of number of sub-assemblies, so you need to follow those. That sort of scenario will mean you'll go with something like MRP Easy, which is very good in heavy manufacturing operations. But at the end of the scale, say you are a e-commerce business, yeah, and you've got a couple of, say, stores on Shopify, you've got maybe a retail outlet, and you may even do B2B sales, right? You don't build anything, you buy stock from China or abroad, so you've got say 20, 30 suppliers, you bring stock in, you may have your own warehouse potentially, and you may also be storing goods at a 3PL, a third-party warehouse. That's a different type of setup. There you may look at a software like, well, you need to go with a software that's got very good connectivity with online sales, marketplace like Amazon, be able to connect to a 3PL through EDI or API, help you with shipment, label printing, be able to connect to your CRM. That sort of software need connectivity. Something like, for example, Sin7 or Deer Systems have got very good native out-of-the-box connectivity. They connect to dozens of apps, and those apps will perform certain functions when they all join together will give you the full sales fulfillment workflow.
Okay,
Okay,
yes,
so,
I think definitely we answered a lot of questions here. So, since this is a short podcast format, before we end, I would like to know one more thing. So, what is the one thing that all businesses could do today in order to overcome the current supply chain issue? Is there such one thing that a company can do?
Right. The current crisis, as we started this conversation, is there's an inventory crisis, overstocking. That's what the problem is at the moment. So what the companies really need to do is to sell that stock. In other words, if they're producing product, build and market it. If they are simply buying, make sure that product appears on their online shops or wherever their sales channels are. The key thing is bring the demand in to reduce the stock holding. That reduces cash. That reduces the chance of failure or effectively a problem where your cash flow then becomes the current problem. The current issues for businesses is cash flow, and to be honest, that's in most circumstances. And cash flow problem means you need to inject cash. And if you're a product-based businesses, you're probably sitting on too much stock. You need to get rid of that stock.
Excellent. I appreciate your
That's all right.
Your presence here at this podcast today. So, okay, this was the first Kounteq podcast. Any resources mentioned in this video will be available in the comment section. So also, if you found any of this useful, make sure to subscribe and leave a comment below. We actually read all the comments. So we got a lot of new content coming in the new year to help businesses like you overcome current economic challenges with practical steps you can apply with some great guests. And also, if you wish to speak to Manzar directly, you can add him on LinkedIn, Manzar Rubani. You can also add me on LinkedIn. And yeah, that's it for today. So thank you very much, guys. Thank you, Manzar, one more time.
It's a pleasure. Thank you, Marco. Speak to you soon.